Welcome. I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Infrastructure for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. To begin, I'm Nathan Neudorf, the MLA for Lethbridge East and the chair of this committee. We will begin starting to my right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Joe Ceci, the MLA for Calgary Buffalo.
Miranda Rosen, MLA for Banff Kananaskis.
Jackie Armstrong Humnick, MLA for Fort Saskatchewan Vegreville.
Glenn Van Dyken, MLA Athabasca Barhead Westlock.
Marie Renault, MLA for St. Albert.
Thomas Dang, Edmonton South.
Jasbir Dio, MLA for Barbados.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the members participating virtually. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. We have Mr. Roswell. Mr. Walker.
Good evening. Jordan Walker, MLA Sherwood Park.
Mr. Jones.
Matt Jones, MLA Calgary Southeast.
Thank you very much. Due to the current landscape we are in, all ministry staff will be participating in the estimates debate virtually. Minister, please introduce yourself and any officials who are joining you who may be speaking on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Prasad Panda, MLA Calgary Edgemont, and I have with me my DM Shannon Flint, ADM Tracy Allen, and ADM Jennifer Flaman, and I have acting ADM Sheila Harrison, and then our senior financial officer Faye McCann. And then I also have our ED of property management, Leonid Okransky, and also our communication director, Joanne Nugent. So as required, they'll speak.
Thank you very much, Minister. Substitutions for the record. Member Ceci for, Member Ceci as Deputy Chair for Ms. Goring, Mr. Tour for Mr. Barnes, Mr. Jones for Mr. Reid. Before we begin, I would note that in accordance and with the recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, attendees at today's meeting are advised to leave the appropriate distance between themselves and other meeting participants. In addition, as indicated in the February 25th, 2021 memo from the Honourable Speaker Cooper, I would remind everyone of committee room protocols in line with health guidelines, which require members to wear masks in the committee rooms and while seated except when speaking, at which time they may choose not to wear a face covering. A few household items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee meetings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Those participating virtually are asked to turn on their camera while speaking and please mute their microphone when not speaking. To be placed on the speakers list, virtual participants should email or send a message to the group chat through the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please wave or otherwise signal the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent during the duration of the meeting. At this point in time, I would like Mr. Tour just to introduce himself for the record.
Good evening, everyone. Devinder Tour, MLA Calgary Falconage.
Thank you very much. Speaking rotation and time limits, honourable members, the standing order set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 2 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Infrastructure. Standing Order 59.01, subsection 7, establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the Minister or a member of Executive Counselling on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of his comments, a 50-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for independent members, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for government caucus. Individuals may only speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined between the member and minister. The rotation of speaking time will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and the government caucus, with individual speaking times set to 5 minutes for both the member and the ministry. These times may be combined into a 10-minute block. One final note, please remember that discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless of whether or not speaking times are combined. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message the committee clerk about the process. Ministry officials, at the direction of the minister, may address the committee. Ministry officials are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit appropriately distanced at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to 2 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule, and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise. However, the speaking block time and the overall 2-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 17th, 2021. Amendments must be in writing and approved by the Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk, and as a courtesy, an electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. I now invite the Minister of Infrastructure to begin his or her opening remarks. Mr. Panda, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to tell you before that's just.
Okay.
I believe. Thank you. I believe pursuant to the February 22nd, 2021 memo and the guidance you just outlined at the beginning of this meeting, members who are not speaking should be wearing masks at this committee. Thank you.
That is correct. Please, members, would you be wearing masks as according to the rules? Thank you very much. Again, Minister, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to present Alberta Infrastructure's estimates for 2021-22 and our business plan for 2021 to 24, together with my Deputy Minister Shannon Flint and all our department colleagues, as I introduced before. Budget 2021 protects the lives and livelihoods of Albertans with an historic investment in infrastructure, in particular in healthcare facilities, while laying the foundation for economic growth. And I'm proud to say that my Ministry of Alberta Infrastructure plays a vital role, which is to deliver on the priorities laid out in the 2021 capital plan. With the change in government in 2019, we initially promised to adopt the outgoing NDP government's capital plan, which committed about $6 billion annually. With the onset of the pandemic, we decided to somewhat increase the spending on capital projects to keep more Albertans working through the downturn. We know that infrastructure investments drive our economy and are a major force in job creation. In fact, the government's 2021 capital plan investment of $20.7 billion over 3 years will support more than 50,000 direct and 40,000 indirect jobs throughout our province. These include good-paying jobs related to construction, design, engineering, and that support tradespeople throughout the duration of a project. In addition, the positive impact from this investment ripples out from the construction worksite to benefit local manufacturers, suppliers, and trucking companies. At a time when jobs remain scarce, taxpayers' spending on infrastructure supports the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. I would also like to point out that Alberta's culture of workplace safety and rigorous adherence to advice provided by the Chief Medical Officer of Health has kept construction sites across the province busy throughout the pandemic. My thanks to all the tradespeople, construction workers, and project managers who made this possible. As my ministry builds, renews, and maintains public infrastructure like the schools, health, and government facilities, we are guided by the Infrastructure's 2021-24 business plan and its two desired outcomes. Our efforts are supported through Infrastructure's 2021-22 voted estimates totaling about $2.5 billion. Of our budget total, the majority, or $2 billion, is in the capital investment vote, largely split between school and health capital projects. This is an increase of $527.1 million or 35.9% from the 2020-21 forecast of $1.5 billion. The increase is mainly a result of the timing of cash flows needed to deliver approved school, health, and government facility capital projects. These facilities are necessary to support the delivery of government programs and services for Albertans. Looking at school infrastructure, $778.2 million is dedicated to constructing new facilities, modernizing existing schools, or investing in school capital maintenance. This includes $267.4 million new funding for 14 new school projects, including funding for the modular classroom program, and provides for 63 previously approved school projects that are in planning, design, or under construction throughout the province. By the end of 2021, we expect construction on 17 of these school projects to be complete and ready to meet the needs of students and communities for years to come. Looking at health infrastructure, $768.8 million is dedicated to building new health facilities, renewing existing ones, or investing in health capital maintenance and renewal. Some of the health projects currently in construction include, in Calgary, the Calgary Cancer Center, the Foothills Hospital Power Plant expansion, the Peter Lougheed Center redevelopment, the new Bridgeland Riverside Continuing Care Center. Projects in Edmonton include Gene Zwazdowski Center at Norwood, the Misericordia Community Hospital Modernization Program, and the new South Edmonton Hospital. There is also funding for the Rocky View Hospital in Calgary, the Lacrete Community Health Center, the old High Prairie Hospital demolition, and the Red Deer Hospital expansion. Infrastructure's capital investment vote includes $315.9 million to property management, which includes upgrading and reviewing government-owned facilities. In addition to health and education, there is $123.7 million for the government facilities like the new Red Deer Justice Center, the Agri-Value Processing Business Incubator in Leduc, and the complex needs residential build, which will provide a new housing complex in Calgary with integrated health and social supports for clients with complex needs. Infrastructure also works with the Government of Canada to ensure Alberta receives a share of federal infrastructure funding to support the most critical and current needs in our province. This includes the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP, which is providing $3.6 billion to support infrastructure projects. To date, 78 projects in over 30 constituencies have been approved for ICIP funding. Recently, we also approved some small-scale capital maintenance and renewal projects through a new ICIP COVID-19 resilience stream. This stream is meant to help offset the challenges brought on by the pandemic. The COVID-19 stream is not new money, but it does provide us with more flexibility on how we spend the ICIP money already allocated to Alberta. I would also like to reiterate this government's commitment to explore alternative financing options like public-private partnerships and using the Canada Infrastructure Bank. We saw an important agreement signed with the CIB to improve irrigation in southern Alberta and are currently evaluating bids on a bundle of high schools to be delivered using the P3 model. Taking a look now at Infrastructure's 2021-22 expense vote, which includes $446.8 million, this number reflects my ministry's efforts to effectively manage government-owned and operated facilities with a focus on sound financial stewardship, quality, and efficiency. Overall, the expense budget covers funding for day-to-day operations of about 1,800 government-owned buildings, management of lease space to meet government program needs, staffing to support these activities. It also provides funding for ongoing capital planning activities in support of the capital plan. The expense vote is a decrease of $43.2 million or 8.8% from 2020-21 forecast of $490 million. This difference is mainly because of a decrease of property operations from reducing government space and reductions in COVID-19 costs paid by the infrastructure. In 2020-21, this included government-wide purchases such as personal protective equipment, plexiglass installations, and increased cleaning. While almost 95% of infrastructure's total operating expense is due to the management of government space, mostly in lease obligations, utilities, and property management contracts, we are committed to doing our share to help our government meet its fiscal objectives. With measured and practical solutions in place, infrastructure will continue to achieve savings over the long term. This includes reducing government space, taking advantage lower leasing costs, and using tenant allowances against rent. Guided by our business plan outcomes and focus.
Excuse me, Minister. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you very much. That concludes your 10-minute opening remarks. For the 50 minutes that follow, the members of the official opposition and the minister may speak. The timer will be set for 20-minute intervals so that you are aware of the time. Mr. Dang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could go back and forth with the minister.
Minister, are you prepared to go back and forth? I think that was a yes. So. Thank you, Minister,
for his comments and the work done today. I know that it's a considerable amount of work to get these budgets done. And I want to start out by saying that even though we are going back and forth, I'm going to try and keep my questions brief, and I hope you can try and keep your answers brief as well. We have a lot of questions and not a lot of time here. I'd like to start off fairly high level and perhaps even start in the strategic plan so that we can work our way into the more nitty-gritty details. I just want to start on page 15 of the strategic plan. That's 1.5. I want to talk about the headline under building public infrastructure. Under building public infrastructure, there's a reference to grants to improve rural high-speed internet and utilities. Could you tell me, I guess, just basically where in the budget, in the fiscal plan, in the business plan, where a line item for that is going to be, or how much money is going to be provided in these grants for improving high-speed internet and rural utilities?
Sorry, Member Dang, it's actually broadband is not part of infrastructure. It's not in infrastructure budget right now. Yeah, so probably maybe in Service Alberta or other departments.
So if I understand that, sorry, thank you. So if I understand that correctly, there's going to be no capital component to improving rural broadband.
We're actually discussing with the federal government and the Canada Infrastructure Bank to explore options. Right now, it's not part of this budget 2021.
Thank you. So I'd like to move on then to we're still on page 15. We're talking about the irrigation projects, which I'll get into the specifics of irrigation a bit later in the fiscal plan. But it mentions that you're planning to spend $244.5 million over 7 years on irrigation expansion projects. So just to clarify, that's just sorry, does that include rehabilitation, or is that just in the new projects that have been announced under the joint project with the feds?
Probably you had to talk to agriculture about that because the irrigation investments we announced last year, that was part of funding from Canada Infrastructure Bank. So that's a loan. And Alberta government also invested a part of that together with the local irrigation districts, but it's not part of infrastructure budget right now.
Okay, so you're telling me that even though it's on page 141 of the fiscal plan under irrigation projects, and we've got $120 million over 3 years, which is the Alberta government portion, I understand, about $830 million total, but 75% of that, of course, is irrigation district self-funded. But you can't tell me how much of that's going to be in irrigation rehabilitation, which is also on page 141, versus irrigation projects, which is the ICIP portion, which I understand your ministry is responsible for administering those projects in Alberta. Isn't that right?
Our ministry is responsible to coordinate with Canada Infrastructure Bank and assist other departments. In this case, we assisted the Department of Agriculture. But the budget is accounted for in agricultural department's budget mostly. And when you do that department's estimates, either you or your colleagues may be able to get answers there. Right now, it's not part of my department.
Thank you. We'll follow up at agriculture then. And then I guess the last question I have in the strat plan here is same page, but you mentioned that there's been a third-party review that's intended to be done or will be done to review all of the government-owned assets. Have you decided on a contractor for this third-party review? Do you have an idea of how much that review will cost and how you will be determining who conducts the review?
So it's not yet finalized. I'll share with you more details when we finalize how we select the contractor. Most likely we had to bid the contract, and one of the consultants will be awarded from competitive bidding.
Sure. So I understand that you don't have those details today. I would hope that maybe you could have them before we vote on the budget, but if not, would you commit to tabling those to the Assembly when it becomes available?
When they are available, we'll definitely let you know. But as we stated in the budget, we're trying to do more with less. We're trying to find efficiencies because, as you know, we ran a budget deficit of $20 billion last year, $18 billion this year. So we had to deliver government services more efficiently with lower costs compared to other provinces. That's what we are working on. But when we are ready, I'll definitely share with you.
Thank you. So I'd like to move on to the business plan then. Like I said, I'm going to get slowly more and more specific. So in the business plan on page 64, you have performance measure 1B, which is about government-owned and operated facilities and their physical conditions. I'm just wondering, could you explain to me how the categories are evaluated and how often the ministry evaluates the categories for the buildings?
So that's 1B, performance measure. So the overall condition of government-owned and operated facilities is expected to stay steady in the next 3 years with no changes to the targets. Condition targets take into account major building renovations and modernizations that have been completed, such as upgrades to current infrastructure, as well as government properties planned for disposition. And similarly, new facilities in various stages of development will impact targets. The targets also take into account the natural aging of all facilities, which offsets the impact of new facilities and major renovations. And the methodology uses a facility condition index, it's FCI, which is a ratio of estimated cost over the next 5 years. And these measures allow infrastructure to track physical condition of our facilities over time to support long-term capital planning. And these measures are updated annually. Right now, infrastructure uses a numbered rating scheme, for example, Category 1, with FCI of less than or equal to 15%. So then Category 2 is facilities with an FCI that is greater than 15% or equal to or less than 40%. And Category 3 is facilities with an FCI of greater than 40%. And then I have definitions of each category. For example, Category 1 is adequate for intended use and...
Thank you, Minister. I can read that in the budget itself. I'm wondering, will you be able to provide the formula for FCI that the government uses? Perhaps we can table that at a later date if that's possible.
So the methodology uses, as I said, to calculate FCI is a ratio of estimated costs over the next 5 years to correct the physical condition deficiencies relative to the facility's replacement value. So that's the...
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. So I guess, and you mentioned this already in your speech here, that the intent is for the government to maintain at the current level for the next 3 years. Could you explain to me, does that mean that deficiencies that exist, you intend to, I guess, limp them along or maintain and not improve the condition of facilities on average over the next 3 years in Alberta? Is that right?
No, we will continue to invest in improve the facilities because that was one of the recommendations from McKinnon panel. We want to look at all the deferred maintenance because we want to extend the life of those assets. Otherwise, it will cost too much to replace those assets. So we'll continue to invest. As you see, this year and last year, we increased our capital maintenance and renewal budget. We, in fact, accelerated last year in 2020. We brought forward $1 million for both the infrastructure and transportation CMR projects.
I guess the question is, then, because the numbers aren't changing, is it you will bring the, I guess, could you explain to me that means that the stuff that's in the bottom third or Category 3, you'll bring some of those up, but you expect some of Category 2 to drop to Category 3, or why won't the numbers change over time?
So I gave you the ratios there. So depending on the assessment we receive from the professionals on the condition of the asset, so we either accelerate fixing those assets or we delay it based on the evidence and professional advice we get.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, I guess, I want to ask about performance measure 1A as well, which is the average number of calendar days required to complete infrastructure managed over threshold procurements. I'm just wondering why your target over the next 3 years, which is 26, it stays the same over the next 3 years, is I guess worse than your average over the last year. Like, why are you aiming to do worse?
So you're asking me about 1A performance measure, average number of calendar days required to complete infrastructure managed over threshold procurements. Is that the question?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering why, like it says here in 2019-20, it takes you an average 23.3 days to complete a procurement, but then your target for this year and next year and the year after is 26 days. So you're actually aiming to do not as well as you did previously.
Right, this is actually a new performance measure, and this measure supports the ministry in creating efficiencies, and it will allow for the timely delivery of innovative infrastructure solutions and higher quality outcomes by enhancing the ability to deliver projects on time, on budget, and to specification by developing more accurate project schedules and gaining efficiencies.
But Minister, you're aiming to do worse. That's literally in the measure, right? Like you're 23.3 days right now, but your target is 26 days. So you're aiming to get worse. Is that? I'm just trying to understand why that would be the case.
Well, so we can't generalize. That depends the type of projects, procurements we're talking about. For example, hospital projects, they're more complex. So it all depends on the type of project. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on then. I want to move on to the next page, 65, and I want to look at performance measure 2B. And I just want to note that these are quite good, actually, successful targets. And it seems like you've done quite a good job in decreasing the megajoules per square meter. I'm just wondering, can you explain to me how you're improving efficiency in these buildings? Is it largely through upgrades and renovations, or does it also count enclosures of old buildings and things like that?
So 2B is the energy consumption intensity in megajoules per gross square meter. Is that what you're referring, Member Dai? Okay, so energy consumption intensity is the amount of energy consumed by a facility relative to its size, and we are using that measure to evaluate how effectively infrastructure is managing energy in government-owned and operated facilities. And we'll forecast a steady reduction over the next few years based on planned energy projects. And these types of projects can include light emitting diode, for example, LED upgrades, building retrofits, mechanical equipment calibrations, or control systems upgrades. That's how we will try to gain efficiencies through green technologies.
Excuse me. Sorry. Just want to interject. You guys I really appreciate the congenial tone, but I do want to be careful. If we go through the chair, then we don't risk talking over one another, but that's the only reminder. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess, again, yeah, I think that it's a good job that the minister is doing here, and it does seem to be decreasing the energy consumption over time. And just to clarify then, you're saying the majority of those changes are going to be through retrofits, not through closure of old buildings or anything like that?
No, we haven't closed down any buildings if they are functional. And also, I'm also looking at other avenues. For example, as I said, the province is already running huge deficit. So I'm trying to work with the Canada Infrastructure Bank to use some of their programs to achieve those energy efficiencies and through a cost share program. If that doesn't cost Alberta taxpayers much, I want to use those programs. I'll update you in the coming months as we conclude those discussions with Canada Infrastructure Bank.
Thank you. So when those discussions get concluded, would you be able to commit to tabling the outcomes, I guess, for us to see?
Yeah, I can let you know about the details of the agreement if they are not commercially sensitive, but the outcomes will depend. It takes time to get the outcomes in terms of energy efficiency results that we gain. It takes time, but the process and the conditions and all that, I will update you.
Thank you. My next question is for page 66 of the business plan, just on the statement of operations here, and I want to look at the revenue line. So in your revenue line item, basically in the totals, we see a pretty significant drop from the estimate this year to next year. Could you just explain to me why it's basically a $10 million difference in revenue?
So you're talking about 2021-22 target versus 2022-23 target, right?
Yeah, I just wondered what would
Mr.
account for that $10 million difference?
So if you look at this line reflects funds transferred by the Government of Canada for capital contribution toward provincial assets which are recognized as deferred revenue upon receipt and transferred to revenue over the useful life of the asset once it is put into service. And there is no change in 2022 and 23 to 23-24 targets compared to 21-22 estimates. These are a lot of numbers here to repeat, but the change is there is no change in premiums, fees, and licenses, but there is some difference, a decrease of 9.9 million. For the other revenue, which is primarily due to less revenue anticipated from Swan Hills Treatment Center, as the facility moves to process only high concentration PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and biomedical waste. That's mainly because of the decrease in operations there at Swan Hill.
Okay, so there's no like projected sales or anything that would affect that number this year.
No, I think that will come up in the next hour or so about Swan Hill, because I also asked federal government to make up some of that loss. So far, we are not successful, but I'll talk to that more in the subsequent questions.
Sure. Thank you. I want to look at the capital construction line item as well, which is just the second item under expense. And of course, we know this year it's projected to be quite high, at $1.5 billion. But we see a very sharp drop off next year and the year after, dropping to basically historical lows in only 2 years. Could you explain to me why there's such a significant drop in capital construction over time?
So, year 2022-23 and 2023-24 targets decreased by $174.8 million and $642.5 million respectively compared to 2021-22 estimate, mainly due to scheduling and cash flow requirements for health facility projects and school capital projects. Mr. Chair, for example, Calgary Cancer Center or Gene Gwozdowski Center at Norwood, Edmonton, or Edmonton Hospital, and announced capital school projects. These projects, once they go into construction, then the contractor gives us the cash flow requirements. Some years they incur more costs. They consume more budget in certain years based on the construction progress. In other years, they lag. So it's all about reprofiling. But all those projects that are committed, they will be fully funded, and they'll be completed.
So that was your first 20 minutes. We're on our second 20 minutes now. Let's carry on.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I'll get 2 more of those, I guess, right?
20 and then 10.
20 and 10, okay, perfect. So thank you, Minister. I guess going back to that, it basically means because you're completing a lot of projects, you're not anticipating starting any new projects, and so the spend will go down over time, is that right?
No, of course, we are starting new projects. For example, this budget this year, 2021, approved 41 new projects, 41, which includes 14 schools and 5 health facilities.
Yeah,
So they
thank you.
will be.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's just the number of, or the cash value of those projects will not exceed the amount of that are completing, because the projects that are completing are quite large, such as Gene Gwozdowski Center or Calgary Cancer and things like that.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, through you, Yeah, so you're right. So all those projects that are approved, either previously approved or this year approved, for example, the 41 projects that are approved this year, they're not fully funded in this year's budget, but they're approved and they'll have money in this year's budget. Same as like Calgary Cancer, for example, we continued the funding over the years. So they'll be funded through the life of the projects. They won't be funded on the year one, but as the project progresses, they'll get the funding.
Sure,
based
thank
on
you.
the forecast and get from contractors.
I have one more question here under in the business plan. I'm just looking at the property management portion, which is under capital investment, the second line there. I'm wondering, I guess, basically why you project such a significant drop in the, it's about half, more than half, I think, of why there's such a big drop over time of property management. What are you doing to find such significant savings?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Dang, so he's right. The 22, 23, and 23, 24 targets decreased by 192.8 million and 190.4 million, respectively, compared to 2021-22 estimate, mainly due to project scheduling and cash flow requirements for accommodation projects such as renovation and restacking of GOA-owned and leased buildings, acceleration of capital maintenance and renewal projects for government buildings as part of the economic stimulus in 2021-22, and additional funding allocated in 21-22 to address high-priority capital maintenance projects for government buildings.
Sure, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, my next question is, we're getting into the fiscal plan now, so just to make it easier for everybody, I want to be on page 182 of the fiscal plan. And this is Schedule 21, which speaks to FTEs in the government. I note that in this year's estimate, that the Ministry of Infrastructure intends to reduce the number of FTEs by 72, which is the single largest number out of any department in the government. Would you be able to provide a detailed breakdown of exactly which positions are being reduced?
Yeah, so you asked a very important question. I take that very seriously because it's the jobs, it is the livelihoods of people. But the department is currently undertaking an analysis on a review of the model that we have for several buildings to see if there are savings that can be applied if we shift the delivery model. For example, in the museum. Royal Alberta Museum, in that building, for example, we're looking at options to outsource the service instead of delivering in-house through our own staff. So decisions like that, we are consulting with their union representatives, but we have not made any decision yet on those. We're still working through the analysis and with the Alberta Union of Public Employees, as I mentioned, and also we are trying to minimize layoffs and try to achieve those targets through attrition, mainly attrition.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to dig into that a little bit. Like you said, I understand that AUPE is being consulted on these changes, and I think my understanding is that I think there's 4 sites that are primarily being consulted on it. The Michener Center in Red Deer, Spy Hill Center, the Spy Hill Correctional Facility in Calgary, the federal building here in Edmonton, of which we're both in right now, of course, and as you said, the RAM as well, and I believe the courthouse as well. Sorry, the courthouse is being consulted on as well. So I think that works out to about 180 employees total that AUP represents between those sites, is my understanding. So you're accounting for 72, that's your estimate, right? The consultation's not done yet, the negotiation isn't done with the union yet, but you've already decided a number. I guess, can you just help me understand how you've made this projection and whether it will change based on how those consultations go?
Um, so the breakup of 72 is 28 at Royal Alberta Museum, and the remainder of of that 72 less 28 is through attrition. So once the list is finalized, we'll reveal that. But the workforce for other buildings you are talking about, we haven't. We're not looking at any of that right now, but I can tell you the full-time equivalent reductions do not include any reductions for those locations you talked about, Federal Building or Michener or Spy Hill or courthouses. We are only looking at this Royal Alberta Museum right now.
Thank you. That's actually really good to hear. And I guess since this is the largest number of FTE cuts, and you said, of course, there's 28 at RAM, and the remainder of those jobs, to be clear, there's no layoffs. It will entirely be through attrition. Is that right?
So over a period of time, there could be some layoffs, but we will think through carefully because that impacts people. So we'll try to minimize that. As I said, mainly my ask of my colleagues is to achieve those targets through attrition.
Okay, and thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Of course, those jobs, of course, you said will be replaced in terms of things like at RAM. You're intending to outsource those. Are those going to be put out for public tender then? And if and when the decisions on the remainder of those positions are, would you be able to commit to tabling the breakdown of those positions?
Yeah. So, but one thing I want to make it clear: those jobs are not going to go away. Instead of public service employees employed in Government of Alberta, it will be delivered, those services will be delivered through private companies. They still need those people, so the number of jobs will remain there, but the delivery will be changed from my colleagues here in infrastructure to the private agencies.
Thank you. I want to move on from this. I think that it's been very illuminating, some of what you've said there. And I want to move on to other sections of the capital plan. And Minister, I think you're probably expecting this question, so I won't belabor it too much, but I'm looking at the line item on page 138 for the Edmonton Hospital. The Edmonton Hospital, of course, announced several years ago now and has seen a significant delay over the next several years here. And I've noted, of course, that in the 2021 to 2022 estimate and targets from last year to this year, we've seen a reduction of around $12 million. And of course, I see there's money budgeted in the out years for those in 22, 23, 23, 24, and presumably further down the road as well. But could you explain to me why you've reduced the target in this fiscal year by $12 million?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Through you, Mr. Chair, I know Member Dang is very passionate about this particular hospital project. I appreciate his concerns, but I can assure him through you, Mr. Chair, that the major projects like the hospital project, these are multi-year, long-term projects because they need careful and thorough planning. Otherwise, I am afraid things could go sideways, like, for example, Grand Prairie Hospital, which we just finished. So a member opposite's party also went through that when they were in government, because these kind of projects could go sideways if we don't handle them carefully. That's why there are different steps through business case, through clinical planning, through functional programming. Those are all done through multiple stakeholders. In this case, Alberta Infrastructure is the client for Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services, depending on their availability in participating in those clinical clinical planning or functional programming in all those steps. There was slight delay because they told us they are busy in dealing with the pandemic. But I can assure Member Dang that right now we are actually bidding to award site services for underground utility work. So once we award that contract in the coming months, I'll keep you informed. You can see when a contractor mobilized there doing site service work, then probably you can go there and take your videos there next time if you tell me in advance.
Mr. Thank you. I mean, I drive by it every day as I come to the legislature, so I definitely see the work when it starts. I guess just to clarify, then, when you're saying that it's a result of the clinical operations and planning delays, basically you're saying that due to issues outside of your control, the design of the process has been delayed slightly, and you've reallocated that into the later years.
Right, exactly. So that the funding will reflect the requirements of projects. So as we, if suddenly if all the plans fall in line, and if we are able to achieve more progress, then those projects will be funded adequately. So I'm very confident in telling you that.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to look at a couple other things, but I'm going to give my colleague from Calgary Buffalo. Got it right the first time. I'm going to give my colleague from Calgary Buffalo a chance to ask a couple questions before hopefully he leaves me a few minutes left as well.
Yeah, just Joe Cece here. Just wanted to follow up on the hospital theme that my colleague from Edmonton has started. And the Calgary Cancer Centre is one that I think you'll agree, Minister, it looks beautiful from the outside. It's a massive building, and the structure coming up and being the envelope being finished. It's very striking, and certainly proud of our government for making that decision to go with that one hospital in that one spot for people who need cancer support throughout southern Alberta. My question is, when I look at the capital plan on page 138 in the fiscal plan, it seems like, and it's a little, and I heard your answers with respect to the cash flow and the construction schedule and the drawdown and those kinds of things, and putting money in place for that. But perhaps you could take me through the numbers a little bit. I see the estimate for this year's 213, and then it goes down to 192 and 63 for a three-year total of 468. And when I compare that to previous fiscal plans, I have a four-year total of $1,034,000,000. So my question is, has the size of the total expenditure for the Calgary Cancer Centre changed, or is it still the same? Because we're seeing less money in targeted out years here in your three-year total than previous fiscal planning line items for that Calgary Cancer Centre.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, to my colleague from Calgary. So as a fellow Calgarian, I agree with him. The building is coming up really nice. Even during the pandemic, luckily, touch wood, we had every day more than 1,000 people working at that site. And I want to thank all those tradespeople and construction workers to keep that construction pace to continue the work. And I also want to thank, as a Southern Albertan, fellow Southern Albertan, I want to thank Alberta taxpayers for funding that project. But as you mentioned, the budget for that project is $1.41 billion. That was the investment we approved in the past, and that will be fully funded, and the project scope remains same for that full $1.41 billion. And the contractor assured me The project is on track and it is on time, on budget. I don't have the individual numbers right now because there are a lot of numbers, but I can assure you the project is tracking on time, on budget, and it will be completed as per that budget. But the devils are in details, right? So the issue is it's easy to ramp up the construction through the structural progress, but once you get into interiors, that's where it takes a little longer, and because there are a lot of detailing and all the interior fit outs, furniture, equipment, all the instrumentation, that takes. I mean, we progressed a lot with finishing the floors and with all casting the slabs and all that, but right now, they told me they have ordered all the furniture and equipment. They're working with Alberta Health and AHS. So the contractor assures me, and I'm maintaining a close tab on that because I share your concern. But I want you to rest assured there is no issue with the budget, as I explained. The cash flow varies based on contractors' progress year to year, but they assured me even recently that they are tracking it on time.
That's a relief and good to hear, and you can appreciate that you don't see those confirmations in this fiscal plan. What you see is an estimate in 2 years in the total. But I think that's good news for all people who need that support, and that will help in the future. I'll turn it back to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, through you, I want to move on to school projects, which I think is something that almost every MLA in this place finds near and dear to their heart, and certainly something that we need to commit lots to. So under renewing educational infrastructure on page 139, I noticed that there's just a very large modular classroom program spanned this year, which I think is probably necessary considering how many kids are at least running around my riding. I know that in many other ridings in Calgary, there's lots and lots of kids as well. Could you explain to me perhaps for the modular classrooms just how many modular classrooms you intend to build and distribute, and could you give a breakdown of the number of modulars per board?
Just 1 second. I'm just asking my staff here. I don't have the numbers right away, but we had to work with education on this, and we will provide that information. But I agree with your comment a lot, but it's a good problem to have lots of kids in every riding. It's a good problem. Those are all future Albertans and future taxpayers, and we have to support them. But I don't have the exact details of those modulars, but I can provide you in due course.
For sure. Thank you very much. Happy to take that as a written tabling later. I guess my next question is going to be on the new school capital projects. So this year, of course, we budgeted $33 million. I'm wondering if you'd be able to break down how many schools you intend to build for $33 million.
So in this budget, we approved 14 new schools, and so if 14 new schools, for example, if they cost, say hypothetically $500 million, all $500 million you won't find that in a line item in this year's budget, as I said, based on the progress. They'll be funded in the upcoming budgets too, but all those 14 are fully approved. It's not just design money like previously, but I have some numbers here on page 139. If you look at the last line items, school capital project budget 2021. In that column, you mentioned 33 million this year, but next year is 97 million, and following year is 98, and the 3-year total is 228. That's how they account for in the budget. But I can assure you, for example, there are, in addition to these 14 schools that were approved in this budget, we had 63 other schools at various stages of planning, design, construction. But they are also funded in this year's budget, although they were approved in the previous budget. So that's how the accounting works. But these 14 schools, we know this 33 million is not enough for the 14 schools if you are trying to relate them like that, but they'll be funded fully as required.
I guess,
in the
thank you.
upcoming
And
years.
I appreciate that certainly it's over. I mean, most of these school projects take 2 or 3 years to complete. But at an estimated about $20 to $30 million per school, which is how much a K to 9 school, give or take, costs, you're still looking at needing over $400 million, right? And over 3 years, you're only budgeting 228 here. So I guess, are you basically accounting for that difference through things like P3s, or how are you finding that difference in $200 million?
No. So even P3 school, so once they are approved fully funded, fully for full amount of funding. But the delivery method could be either design build or P3. But right now we are evaluating 5 high school bundle schools that are bundled through P3 process, and by late summer or early fall, we will know whether there is value for money. So that's the procurement method, but funding is different. All these schools are fully funded.
That's what concerns me, Minister. I think you've said that you're evaluating as many as 5 high schools, that the procurement method doesn't matter. But if you're evaluating as many as 5 high schools, a high school costs between $70 and $80 million. So we're looking at almost $1 billion in school spend through your 15 schools, but 14 schools you're talking about, right? But again, in your budget, you only have $228 million budgeted over 3 years. These projects, again, take 2 to 3 years, like you said, and that's why they're often funded in the out years. So are you saying that these schools won't be completed within 3 years? Is that where the discrepancy of up to, I guess, over $800 million is now?
Yeah, so whatever it costs in the outer years, they'll be funded fully.
Yes, you're saying that sorry, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Of course, the projects you announced won't be completed, or a significant number of those projects won't be completed within 3 years because the money's just not there right now.
No, they will be completed even before 3 years, and there will be money for those in the outer years.
I guess I'm just not understanding, Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, where that money is, because in 22-23 and 23-24, the numbers just aren't there, right? The number only goes up to 97-98, and the total over 3 years is 228, right? So that's just not adding up to 14 schools.
I can tell you there will be funding because we just announced a capital plan for 3 years, almost $21 billion today we announced. So there is money there. So it's accounting works differently. You can't just calculate that per school so much, and it's not matching. But the funding will match the project needs, and those projects will be announced, and so you'll know the details in the coming days. I'm going to talk about those 14 schools together with the Minister of Health. Stay tuned. Minister of Education. Sorry. We already did health announcements with the Minister of Health last week in Calgary, but with the Education Minister, I'm going to do that in the coming few days, very soon. So stay tuned. That will clarify you.
And we'll definitely be following that. I know we've had similar discussions in the past, so I'm always happy to be corrected or wrong. Actually, I'm happy to be wrong if indeed the funding does come to fruition. I want to keep moving forward on schools, and I want to look at, still on page 139, the second item under renewing educational infrastructure, playgrounds. So for this year, there's $6 million budgeted for playgrounds, which I assume is in the new playground grant, that new schools get the playgrounds. Could you explain to me why in 22-23 and 23-24 those numbers are zero?
For the playgrounds? because they changed that now. It seems it's included in the project budget itself. They're not breaking out cost for playground separately.
So I guess to clarify then, if you're including those playgrounds in the project budget, does that mean that when you build a new school, you will also build a complete playground with that school, or what is the intent here?
Correct.
Well, sorry, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Because of course, formerly it was a grant program, right? So there was I believe there was $225,000 given per school. So you're saying today that the schools you've announced, the 14 schools, and any future schools, you will build a full playground with that school.
Right. So they'll still issue the grants, as I understand, for playgrounds, and those schools will have playgrounds.
But that grant, will it be $225,000 or will it be for a full playground? Because now it's no longer broken out in the budget, right? Like I see playgrounds, 22, 23, it says 0, or there's a dash, right?
Correct. 250,000 per school. I think that will be the grant that will be issued to each school.
Sure. Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that. I want to. I think my colleague from Edmonton Meadows here has a question around schools as well, so I'm going to kick it to him for now.
Thank you. Thank you,
2.5
Mr. Dang.
minutes, just so you know.
2 minutes.
2.5 minutes.
I have a very quick question. Thank you for Mr. Dang, to the minister through Mr. Chair. Very specific to the line on the fiscal plan, page 139. Dang has already referred to a school capital project budgets 2021. So how we can find the specific funding allocated to the high school that was announced last year in Edmonton Southeast? No?
Uh,
Oh,
Try again.
can you hear me, Minister, or?
I heard he's asking about specific funding for a school in Edmonton Southeast. So what is this? This is a release. Oh, okay. So that's part of that high school bundle. We talked about those 5 schools we bundled together. So Edmonton Southeast is bundled together with Edmonton Heritage Valley and 3 other high schools, one in Leduc, one in Black Falls, and one in Langton. So those are all we are trying to procure through P3, and those are all funded. And as I mentioned to Member Dang, that once we get all those bids finally evaluated by late summer, early fall, then we will determine if there is value for money through that procurement method. Then if we determine there is value for money, we'll proceed with P3. If not, we'll go through traditional design build method right way.
There's
5 school bundles.
There's only about 7 seconds left, so thank you, Minister, and we'll get back to you later.
Thank you very much, members. That concludes the first portion of questions for the official opposition. Given that there are no independent members here, we will now move to the government caucus for 20 minutes of questions from their members. Starting with Ms. Rosen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. In your estimates, page 134, sections 2.2 and 2.3 are for health and education infrastructure. I'm just wondering if you can confirm that these amounts listed in those line items, they're $634 million and $762 million respectively, are above and beyond the funds that are already allocated towards healthcare and education in their budgets. Can you just confirm that?
Just give me just one quick second here. Which page are you referring again?
Just sections 2.2 and 2.3 of your budget. They're for health and education infrastructure. Just confirming that those amounts are above and beyond the health and education budgets.
So usually we get for capital projects, they transfer their budget to my department. So I'm just looking up here quickly, just 1 second. So is it above and beyond health and education budgets? So if you look at page number 137, so line item 2, if you look at capital construction, so health facilities infrastructure 634,857,000 and school infrastructure is 762,236,000. Yeah. So this is for the capital build of those schools and hospitals. They won't be included in health budget.
Okay, thank you. So just to follow up on that then, the health budget and education, 21.8 billion and 4.9 billion respectively, are not even covered by every tax dollar collected in our province, which is around 16.5 billion every year. So every tax dollar collected above and in our province alone doesn't even cover those two ministries. And then we've got 1.4 billion dollars in additional spending allocated in your budget. So I'm just wondering, since a lot of the funding in your ministry is set to accompany funding already allocated for ministries in their personal budgets, can you just speak to what your ministry is doing to ensure that critical infrastructure continues to be built in Alberta while also being cost effective in the building and the contracting of the infrastructure?
I commend you for your concerns about short of funding through tax revenues. I appreciate, but our UCP government is committed to build these capital infrastructure projects, basically to recover our economy and grow our economy. And I fully agree with you, but as part of government's third objective, which is to improve efficiencies in delivering government services, infrastructure is playing its role. We are trying to do more with less, and we will we'll play our part in meeting government's fiscal objectives. Your concern is very valid. I can tell you, McKinnon panel also identified how to improve those efficiencies. One is they wanted infrastructure to lead the response to look at land assets, for example, across public sector, to develop policies and processes on surplus land and land disposal. And also, my department is working with Treasury Board and Finance to ensure capital maintenance and renewal funding will go to the highest priority. Because we want to first, extend renew and extend the life of the existing government-owned assets, because to replace them, it will cost much more. So that's why McKinnon recommended we invest in renewing those assets, and that will result in best practice management. And also, we are leading the development of the approach to alternative delivery models, like I said before, including public-private partnerships. And at Alberta Infrastructure, it's important to be as efficient as possible so that we can get shovels in the ground and focus our budget on building top-class quality infrastructure for the future. That's how we will provide the best value to Albertans. As I said before, Member Dang was asking me about the FTE reduction and all that. So those are all part of how Alberta Infrastructure contribution to meet government's fiscal objectives. We're trying to do more with less, and we are trying to use alternate financing and delivery methods like P3s, because P3 partners can build public infrastructure faster, cheaper in some cases, and also, they can bring in upfront innovation and creativity in the design phase. So we are looking at all those options. We are using federal funding. We are using CIB. But your concerns are valid. I assure you, infrastructure is doing their part to help government meet its fiscal objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. On the topic of P3s, it's a perfect segue to my next question. In your business plan on page 65, section 2A, the performance metrics showed that the cost per occupant per year in government-owned office space is roughly $8,500. So I'm wondering if you can tell me how much this number compares to per occupant cost of office space in P3 projects, and how that also compares to the per occupant cost of an average private sector corporate office.
So infrastructure cost for occupant in office space that cannot be compared to the private sector, because a business bottom line is influenced by a number of other factors that may be different from Government of Alberta, such as size of the building, type of business, location, number of workers, type of workers, and definitions of the occupant, and other operational costs they may have. But simply put, there are many external and internal variables involved in the calculation for different companies that we would not be comparing apples to apples, even if the data was available. But in addition, infrastructure engaged Deloitte, the leading management consultant, in 2016 during the previous government, to review its property operations approach. And the Deloitte study concluded that Government of Alberta is currently operating at a significantly higher level of efficiency. And the report noted that GOA had the lowest cost per square meter at $95.05 per square meter. And the report also noted that GOA results reflected a more efficient portfolio and management structure. And the comparisons, when you do jurisdictional scan on a cost per square meter basis, we found that Alberta infrastructure, it cost $95.05, whereas Ontario, it cost them $147.71, and City of Toronto is $154.38, and in British Columbia, it is $182.56. Public Works and Government Services, it's 188.66. So those are comparables, because with the private sector, it's not apple to apple. But I take your point. Should we be complacent, or can we do better? We can always do better, and my colleagues at Alberta Infrastructure are striving hard to bring those costs even lower. And in the coming years, I'm confident we can reduce those costs and even compare better with other jurisdictions in the coming years.
Okay, thank you. One more question then. Similarly, on line item 3.3 of your estimates document, page 134 in the budget, is for government-owned facilities and preservation. Last year, the amount our government spent on preserving government offices and infrastructure increased by 41%. And this year, we're projecting it to increase by another 62% over last year, or 239% over the past 2 years, which is a dangerously increasing trajectory. So I'm just wondering if you can explain what's causing that increase.
So, as you know, our government increased capital maintenance and renewal funding in 2020 and 21 with a vision to stimulate job growth and support Alberta's economy. Because as you all asked us to accelerate that capital maintenance funding, because mainly, for example, when the schools are empty, that's the time to fix leaking windows or leaking taps or roofs, or when the roads are empty, that's the time you want us to fill the potholes and all. So that's why we increased the funding in 2020, because preservation has traditionally been funded well below required levels, as noted by the McKinnon panel. So that's why we are trying to maintain infrastructure portfolio of buildings, and we are trying to address all that deferred maintenance. And these increases you are seeing now will bring funding more in line with the private industry benchmarks of the required 1.5 to 2% of building replacement value to properly maintain facilities. So that's one of the benchmark we follow in private industry, 1.5 to 2% of the building replacement value they budget for maintaining those properties. But we'll slowly get there, but we realize the urgency to preserve the taxpayer-owned assets in Alberta, because we can't afford to replace those assets.
Thank you. And one final follow-up to that. Do you have any information on how those numbers for the facility preservation compare to facilities operating under a P3 model, or are you unable to speak to that, similar to the previous question?
So the previous builds of P3 in Alberta are mostly schools. I think we built 40 schools, and when we build those 40 schools, they have, I think, almost 30-year contract. So the maintenance is in their scope. But what we are spending right now, they are in line with P3 models, which include private industry benchmarking funding for facility preservation. Private industry benchmarks for facility preservation, as I noted before, is 1.5 to 2% of building replacement values. And the province has traditionally funded facility preservation below that level. That's why McKinnon advised us to focus on all the deferred maintenance.
Okay, thank you. I'll cede the rest of the time to, I believe, my colleague, Ms. Armstrong-Hominiuk.
Actually, it's Arthur as well here. Am I okay to go?
Yes, you are. Please proceed.
Okay. The Swan Hills Treatment Center has a yearly operating expense of about $30 million. Would you be able to give some details on what exactly Swan Hills is, and what is infrastructure doing to reduce those expenses?
That's a very good question, because this is one unique facility, Swan Hills Treatment Center. It's the only facility of its kind in Canada that has the ability to destroy high concentration PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. And this chemical, which was once used as an insulator in electrical transformers, has been demonstrated to cause a variety of adverse health effects, including increased rates of various types of cancer. So as a result of the federal regulations that require the end of use or destruction of all PCBs by December 31st, 2025, that facility has to be phased out over the next 4 years. But we have been spending, Alberta taxpayers have been spending, a lot over the period of time. In fact, we spent $1.58 billion to process that toxic waste I mentioned that comes from all corners of Canada, and that will be processed at very high temperatures at this remote facility. So we are coming to an end to close that facility in the coming years. We have to phase it out. That's why I wrote to Federal Minister McKenna, because the there were jobs involved and there was investment because Alberta is treating everybody else's waste across Canada, coming from across Canada. So I have written to Minister McKenna, federal ministers, and Minister Wilkinson and Oregon and Freeland. I have asked them to, since we spent over a period of years, $1.58 billion, I asked them to compensate us $84.6 million per year for the next 4 years. So I only asked $338.4 million from them to cover and reimburse Alberta for all the capital and operating costs we incurred over a period of time, and also to retire that facility. But there was radio silence from our federal colleagues. I haven't heard. I sent reminders. So we don't have any FTP, that is federal provincial territorial ministers meeting in the last almost 15, 16 months since Minister McKenna became Minister of Infrastructure. So once we are in that meeting, I want to remind her again that it's not acceptable. Alberta did its part, and we need federal government to help us.
Well, good luck with that and keep on trying. So I'll pass that on to MLA Armstrong Hominick now. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, Chair, through you to the Minister, I would like to ask the following question. Last fall, Minister, you released the Unsolicited Proposals Framework and Guidelines. Can you please explain what Unsolicited Proposals, USPs, are, and what the government is hoping to achieve from this framework? If an unsolicited proposal has been submitted, and if so, what do they propose, and is the government moving forward with, and why?
That's a very good and timely question, because all the previous P3s were approved through the capital planning process, going through Treasury Board and Finance. So usually those projects are initiated by stakeholders like our municipal partners or others, and mostly in public sector. But, in that process, all of those innovative, creative projects that might help the local communities like yours, for example, like your Wagerville and other communities. They are missing out. So that, and as our member from Banff mentioned, that government is already running deficit and we don't have enough tax revenue. So we had to involve private sector money. So if they come forward through this unsolicited P3, I wanted to entertain those good ideas and project proposals, but there was no framework in the past for that, so that's why I brought it up with our cabinet, and we got that approved, and we released that framework. Now we can entertain those proposals. It doesn't mean every proposal will go through and result in a project, but at least now we have a system through this framework to assist those stakeholders to bring in their proposals in a private partnership. And then our department, in consultation with our partner ministries, we evaluate those offers on their merit. And if we find them in line with our objectives of Alberta's economic growth and building economic and social infrastructure, we'll move it forward and we'll facilitate them.
Thank you, Minister. The government member's first block of questioning has now ended. We now move to the final round of blocks of 10 minutes, where no one member can speak more than 5 minutes total, including the minister. As mentioned, members are asked to advise the chair at the beginning of their rotation if they wish to combine their time with the minister's time. We will time each person individually. And please remember that discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless of whether or not speaking time is combined Would, I assume, Mr. Dang or Ms. Renault, you'd like to combine time with the minister?
Sure, thank you.
Minister, the time will be combined, and Ms. Renault, you may begin your 10-minute block.
Thank you. So I'm going to refer you to the fiscal plan, the capital plan, more specifically page 135. And second paragraph notes, funding will be made available to plan and implement an integrated housing, health, and social supports residence for persons with developmental disabilities, which is a program, also a diagnosis, with people with complex needs. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that. So there is nothing in the corresponding estimates for community and social services, nor is there anything in their business plan. So I'm wondering if you could let me know what this new residence is for people with disabilities.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I may have to ask one of my colleagues here to address that, if you don't mind. Just give us a quick second here. So can you go introduce yourself? Or
Hello, it's Faye McCann. I'm the Senior Financial Officer with Infrastructure. The Complex Needs Residential Build project was submitted by Community and Social Services for funding, and then the funding did come to Infrastructure to construct that. And it's a request for funding to build a new housing complex in Calgary. It will have integrated health and social supports, and it's targeted to clients of the persons with developmental disabilities, or the PDD program. So they could have highly complex mental health, addiction, psychiatric, behavioral, medical needs. And so the build will mean that government can offer the appropriate housing, and then it can also offer the appropriate services that those clients will need.
What was the total cost of that funding that was transferred to infrastructure? What was the total?
The total in the 3-year capital plan and the total funding is $28.7 million.
And thank you. And was this a sole source contract?
The contract hasn't been awarded. The funding is just, it was new in this budget. So the project is new. So Infrastructure will have to work with Community and Social Services and plan out, do the appropriate planning to find specifically what the needs are and design the facility. So the construction procurement wouldn't happen until all that planning and design has taken place.
Okay, and will that be put out to tender so organizations may offer to participate or submit their ideas?
The projects will be, yes.
Excellent. Sorry, we're getting some feedback here. Thank you very much. Okay, so I wanted to build on something that my colleague was asking about a little bit earlier. So it's our understanding that there is some preliminary work, I guess, going on to look at different delivery models for some of the buildings that the provincial government currently owns and manages. So those are the Edmonton Federal Building, Law Courts, Spy Hill we talked about, and Michener. And so I don't know what the plan is yet, but changing of delivery model could mean full outsourcing or combination. I'm not entirely sure, but looks like, you know, there's probably about 81 or 80 jobs involved if this proceeds. So my question is, now I understand there are a number of assessments that take place when looking at infrastructure projects, but I'm wondering, is there any kind of risk assessment that looks a little further beyond the bricks and mortar, that looks at the potential dangers of changing a service delivery model? So for example, like Michener Center, I understand there's only about 120 people left that live there, but the last Conservative government did promise that those people could live out their lives there. And what we've seen over the last couple of years are some stripping away of services, right? So there was a camp, LG Barnes, I think it was called, that was lost. Dental services were lost, and then there was a day support program that was lost, certainly not in your ministry. But what I'm getting at is even removing janitorial staff or maintenance staff would make a difference in people's lives. Doesn't seem like it, but it would. And so my question is, will there be an assessment, a risk assessment, beyond the bricks and mortar of Michener, if indeed you are looking at a different service delivery model, that the staff that have been there, regardless of the jobs that they do, actually become integral parts of people's lives? So my question is, what steps would your ministry take to ensure, if the cost savings is minimal, that maybe decide this is not the right way to go when you are considering the lives of people?
Yes, so cost savings, we don't we don't compromise people's lives. That's more precious and important than cost savings. So you're right, we will evaluate those risks carefully. And if there is an opportunity to without risking people's lives or security. For example, in legislature building where we all work, security is important too. So that's why we haven't outsourced those services. So as an example, so like that in every other facility we own, we'll make sure that the total property manager has the ability to manage all those risks only when we are convinced that they are able and they can do it without compromising safety and security. Then we'll transition that after thorough risk evaluation and with the risk mitigation where there is no security threat.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, if I could just follow that up quickly. So am I understanding correctly that beyond the assessment of total property management and all of that, that there would be a commitment to speak to either the people that reside there or their guardians or families to ensure that there is no risk to changing the service delivery model of, say, a place like Michener Centre, even if it comes to facility and maintenance?
So there will be proper consultation with the stakeholders. I can assure you on that. They'll go through a proper consultation process. And whether we can buy in from everybody, it's not possible on anything, but we had to do our job thoroughly to identify any potential risks and how to mitigate it. So we won't, we won't compromise people's safety and security.
Okay, so you will consult with the people that live there and their families and guardians? Is that yes or no?
We will consult with the stakeholders involved in this. Yes, we will consult, but whether we can get their buy-in or not, I don't know till I consult with them. So, but before we'll do internal assessment on the risks.
Mr. Chair, I don't think consultation means getting them to buy in. I mean, it sort of means consultation, asking what works best for them and listening to them. So again, my question is about, giving the people that live there, the men and women that have lived there most of their lives, and their families and guardians, speaking to them directly and hearing what those risks are. I guess I'm just looking for some reassurance that will happen. It hasn't happened in the past. You recall Rosecrest, perhaps. Hasn't happened before, so I'm just looking for that reassurance. Thank you.
We'll be compassionate in our approach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thinking that we only have a couple minutes left here, Minister, I want to ask perhaps a question that you could return to me in writing that will cover a lot of my questions. I noted that on page 136 of your fiscal plan, the second paragraph states, funds have been reprofiled on various projects to align cash flows with expected timelines on construction progress. And it notes further that it's primarily health and school projects. Would your department be able to provide a list of all the projects that have had funds reprofiled from this year into the later years, out years, and would it be able to provide the breakdowns and perhaps like a little bit of a rationale on why that reprofiling was necessary for that project? So for example, like we've already talked about Edmonton Hospital, you said for Edmonton South Hospital it was due to the clinical assessment not being able to be finished. Would you be able to provide that amount of detail plus the project list in writing?
Yeah, so if you look at page 136 of the capital plan, that's part of fiscal plan 2021-24, page 136. So you'll see details there that how funds have been profiled on various projects to align with cash flows, with expected timelines on construction progress. So we definitely have reprofiled certain projects.
Unfortunately, that combines that time. We'll get back to you in 10 minutes. We now go to the government side for their 10-minute block is Mr. Jones, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your answers through the chair to the minister. I'm interested in you expanding on the ISIP program. Can you tell, for the people who are not familiar with the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, can you elaborate on what its purpose is and how it works and what the federal government provides? Thank you.
Excellent. That's a very good question. So ISIP is a cost-shared program between three different partners, federal, provincial, and within the province there could be municipalities or it could be not-for-profits or indigenous communities that want to partner in a project. So, and it has 4 different streams. It used to be 4 different streams in that, like public transit, green infrastructure, and northern and rural communities like that. But this year, they have added a new stream called COVID-19 stream. But they haven't allocated any new money. It is within the previously allocated money. In case of Alberta, we had an allocation of approximately $3.65 billion, which was mainly tied up in 2 transit projects in Calgary and Edmonton. But there were a lot of other projects, about 78 projects we have approved to do various types of projects in rural communities in 30 constituencies. We did that. Flood mitigation, water treatment, whether it is wastewater or in some cases, we approved drinking water projects like that, which will improve the quality of life of people in those communities. So we approved those projects. But then I found that this COVID-19 stream, although it's not a new stream, it's not a new money, we thought we should maximize federal funding. That's why whatever money is left, because there are stringent conditions for that COVID-19 stream, it has to be, the funding is only limited to up to 10% of the balance of that previously allocated ISIP money. In our case, unlike other provinces, Alberta has already used up majority of it. We had about $85 million left, which we ask them to move those funds to COVID stream so we can maximize federal funding, because under COVID stream, federal government will contribute 80% and the province will share 20%, whereas in other streams, it varies from 40% to 75% federal contribution. Only indigenous communities will get 75% funding. Others will get 40 to 50% maximum. Whereas under COVID, you can get up to 80%. So we try to maximize that. And we also had some previously allocated public transit money to various municipalities. We worked with them with the help of Treasury Board and finance members. And then we converted that remaining money in public transit. We told those communities they'll get that money, but instead of public transit, if they choose to get more money from federal government under COVID-19 stream, a majority of them wanted it. So we are working with them to submit that list of projects. So there will be dozens of projects. You you'll hear them in future, but there is also a timeline. So we had to finish those projects by end of 2021. So they had to be shovel worthy and shovel ready. So we are trying to expedite those projects. And just last week, I spoke to Minister Carr, who is in charge of prairie provinces from federal government. I asked him to work with infrastructure minister to extend that timeline from December 31st, 2021 to later years. So we'll see how that works. But it's a very good stream, COVID-19, but no new money. So in case of Alberta, so we don't have much money left. But we are trying to use that to complete some of the capital maintenance and renewal projects of any types of assets and other projects in consultation with mainly seniors and housing. They wanted us to use some of that money and also health. So apart from government buildings that government of Alberta owned, but there are health and seniors and housing, they want to use some of that funding. So we are working on that, and I'm very comfortable to say that's a good scheme, but we run the risk of completing them before 31st December this year.
I'm sorry, Minister, you've used your 5 minutes allotted time in this 10-minute block. 4 minutes are left for MLA Jones to ask questions. Thank you.
To be clear, Chair, is the minister able to answer my questions?
Sorry, not in this.
Yeah, they can go back and forth. He just can't go longer than 5 minutes at any one time.
Okay, I was incorrect. Yes, he may answer your question.
Well, that will make us more productive. Thank you. Through the chair, would the minister be able to comment on the job creation linked to the ISIP program, perhaps direct, indirect, induced? Obviously, that's very important these days. And my understanding, these are low interest loans. Can you quantify the interest rate? And then can you give some examples of ISIP projects that my constituents or Calgarians or Albertans might be aware of around the province? Thank you.
So you're right. These are creating much needed jobs in rural communities while helping us to recover our economy. It's a good stimulus in smaller and rural communities. In the city of Calgary also, for example, in member CC's riding Calgary Buffalo, we are doing few projects, flood mitigation projects, for example, in downtown Calgary. But I'm not sure what you're referring about low interest. You may be thinking about Canada Infrastructure Bank projects, but ISIP is a cost shared. So there is no interest. So federal government shares costs ranging from 40 to 80%, and depending on the type of projects. That 80% is only for a small portion of COVID stream projects, but majority of them range from 40 to 50%, and the remaining, us and the other stakeholders like municipal governments or not-for-profits, they cost share that, so there is no interest to repay. They have to provide their share of capital. Otherwise, if they can't do it, for example, in certain cases, the partners, although we endorsed those projects, but then they came back saying that they couldn't mobilize funds for their share of the project cost, and then unfortunately, there were 2-3 cases. We had to rescind those previously endorsed projects. But the majority of them, actually, 78 projects that I mentioned, we approved in 30 Alberta constituencies. They're all going ahead, and But the only frustration I have is the federal government, decides the outcomes. So we had to match federal outcomes to get those projects approved. And also, they're very, in some cases, it's silly. I gave that feedback to the federal counterparts that they say there has to be consultation, endless consultation on environmental and also First Nation consultations. But I asked them, it doesn't make sense when First Nations themselves are the proponents. Who do they consult with? Why are you insisting they have to consult?
Thank you, Minister. That concludes that 10-minute block. Now back to the official opposition. Mr. Dang, is it going to you? 10 minutes.
Thank you, and I'd like to share my time if that works. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, through you, of course, I just want to get back to that last question I was on, the reprofiling of funds. And I don't want to belabor this. I'm just trying to say, Minister, could you provide a list of projects that have had funds reprofiled this year?
Absolutely. Sorry, I couldn't complete that answer. I ran out of time, but I'll provide you the list of those projects where I pointed you to the different ministries where that money is reprofiled, but under those specific ministries, I'll provide you the list of projects.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I want to move on to another project here on page 141. On page 141 of the fiscal plan, under the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund capital. I noticed that starting next year and in 23-24 as well, the project has been zeroed out again. Could you just explain why that project's been gone to zero?
Sorry, I couldn't note that. Which project? Can you repeat?
Yeah,
it
on page 141, the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund capital.
141.
Your family, social supports, and housing.
Yeah, so I think we had to engage Indigenous Relations Department on that. Based on their recommendation, that was action.
Sure, thank you. We will take that back to Indigenous Relations for that in the future. I want to go back. I want to go back to playgrounds again, and I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but that's on page 139 near the bottom. And sorry, before I ask my questions, could I just ask the chair, when I have about 2 minutes remaining, would you just give me a time warning? And I have some questions I can read into the record.
Yeah, I will do that.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm getting back into playgrounds. I want to be very clear because you said that the playground grants that were formally announced and provided separately to the schools, I guess, those playground grants, you're saying they're now part of the build package. Is that right? So no matter what the delivery model, whether it's a design build or it's a P3, there's going to be a separate playground grant that still exists but no longer shows up as a line item in the budget. Is that right?
Well, I assure you that when the schools are built, they'll have playgrounds, they'll have bathrooms, they'll have roofs, everything. But I'll ask my colleague to give you that assurance too.
Hello,
Go ahead.
Minister Panda. Yes, to your question, what has happened is the playgrounds are now costed out. The funding for the playgrounds are costed out when we pulled together the overall project budget for the school in question. Once that project is approved, then what happens is the grant, infrastructure will issue a grant.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind providing your name and then just carrying on with your conversation? Thank you very much.
I'm Tracy Allen, Assistant Deputy Minister with Infrastructure. So once the project is approved, then we work with Education to provide a grant for $250,000 to the school board, who then take over in terms of completing the construction of the playground itself. So the funding is within the overall project that's funded out, similar to the F&E, furnishings and equipment.
Okay, and then just to follow up, I guess, thank you. The amount of the grant has not changed then. It's still going to be the same as previous years.
That is correct.
Yeah, sure, thank you. And I think my colleague from Calgary Buffalo.
Just Joe Cece here again, Minister Panda. Just a quick question with regard to the capital plan. I'm looking at page 128 of the fiscal plan that says spend on average $7 billion per year on infrastructure projects. How is there a rule of thumb that you have that you anticipate a certain portion, a percentage of those $7 billion to come from the federal government? And what would that be, that percentage that you suspect will come on an annual basis?
Other than ISIP, which we already talked, which previously it was approved $3.65 billion, majority of it was, as you know very well, almost 3 billion of, almost 3 billion is allocated for those transit projects. But we as we want to take full advantage of federal programs, but as far as I know, there is right now there is nothing more than those ISIP funds that they have already allocated to us.
Okay.
But I can
go ahead.
If I can find out more details, if I know more than that, if there is any other department has other federal funding within that $7 billion, I can forward that information to you in due course. But right now, it's only ISIP as far as I know.
Thanks. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you, Minister. I guess my next question is going to be on page 137 of the capital plan. Under the municipal infrastructure support section. I just noticed that basically MSI, while still significant this year, sees more than a cut of 50% next year. Could you just explain where those cuts are going to be, if you have a distribution idea of which municipalities are going to see the bulk of these cuts, or if it's going to be even across the board? Just how do you break down this massive cut in MSI?
So last year, for example, we accelerated funding for those municipalities because during the pandemic, we wanted to provide that stimulus, and we want them to build it when it is cheap to build. They're getting more productivity during that time at a lower cost. So that's why we fast forwarded some of that money, but I don't have the details of individual municipalities. You have to take it up with municipal affairs, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you. And I think the chair is about to note me that I don't have much time left. So I'm going to 3.5 minutes. So Mr. Minister, I really want to thank you for your time. And in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a number of questions into the record. And hopefully if your ministry could get back to me in writing. I'm optimistic that many of these questions can be covered in that list of reprofiled money with rationale there as well. So hopefully it won't be too much work for your department. But I note on page 137 of the fiscal plan that the First Nations water tie-in program is down significantly this year from last year. It's down from 12 million to 7 million. Would you be able to explain that? Still on page 137, the Water for Life program is cut from 50 million to 42 million. Would your department be able to explain that as well? On page 137, CMR, capital maintenance renewal for school facilities is cut from 122 million to 119 million. Would you be able to provide rationale for that cut? On page 141, under the irrigation rehabilitation program, I know we spoke briefly about that, and that it largely falls under the purview of agriculture. But I have spoken with the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association, and they anticipate that in the next 5 years or so, that maintenance will need to increase from the currently budgeted 12 or so million to the 20 or 30 million dollar range. So I'm wondering if you've done any work with agriculture or consultation on when you anticipate increasing maintenance funding so that the infrastructure can be managed at that point. On page 165, I've noted that CFEP, or the Community Facility Enhancement Program, I believe it's called, has received will receive a cut moving forward as well. So I guess I'm wondering if it's at historic lows, why that is. I know you might have to simply reply that I should ask Culture and Tourism. That's okay. I think moving on also, I've noted that on page 174, operational funding for your ministry is being cut from $626 million to $592 million, which is a $34 million cut. So I'm wondering if in writing we could get back just a breakdown of the savings you've been able to find. I think it's quite significant, so I think Albertans would like to know. On page 138, the equipment for the cancer corridor projects is listed at $3 million this year, even though last year there was a forecast for no money being spent this year. So I'm just wondering why we have to spend money this year that should have been spent last year, and what happened in terms of getting that money out the door. A very similar thing with on page 138 with the Foothills Medical Center urgent power capacity. It was only supposed to be forecasted, I believe, at $19 million, but instead it's budgeted at $27 million this year. So I'm just wondering why the discrepancy. We're spending more money than expected, and what happened to getting that money out the door. Same thing on page 138 with the Fort Mac Residential Facility-Based Care Center, Willow Square. We see it's budgeted for money that wasn't forecasted last year. What happened there? Same thing with the Grand Prairie Hospital on page 138, and I guess that's my time.
Thank you, member. I think you managed to get more in there than any of the rest of us could have done. Well done. I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for the consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet next on March 9th, 2021 at 7 p.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economy, and Innovation. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
5 or so on the list, so yeah.